All right, welcome back to Clarity Sessions with GI. For those of you joining us for the first time, you're welcome. Gentle Inspire simply means a voice of clarity in a world of confusion. And the purpose of Clarity Sessions is to help you see clearly, decide better, and to move with purpose. And last week, we started a particular series in our Clarity Session talking about finding what is holding you back. And essentially, I spoke about the reason why I chose the direction I chose. I was going to do a framework based discussion, but I decided I was going to talk about the soul first because every event that happens in our lives happens in the soul. And so I wanted to sort out the issue of the soul, talk about the soul in terms of understanding the soul and the properties of the soul and the way the soul behaves, because these things constitute or could constitute some of the things or the reasons why we're held back in certain situations or in life generally. And so I'm going to just do a little bit of recap of what we did last week. The teaching is already on YouTube here on the video section. So for those of you who want to catch up, you can catch up on the previous session. We essentially talked about the soul. I talked about the property of the soul and talked about the behavior of the soul as it relates to people and the environment. And so I'm just going to wrap up just a recap of what I started talking about. And then we'll get into the core of today's conversation, which is transforming the soul. We said the soul is an emergence from the spirit and the body coming together. Essentially, your soul is you. When you talk about the person, the self, you're talking about your soul. And so that's essentially the definition within the context of this conversation. And I said that the soul has certain properties, and the reason we need to know the property of a thing is the property of a thing dictates its behavior. So if you know the property of a thing, you can understand the way it will behave in certain situations when certain conditions align. And so we gave about 7 properties of the soul, which I'm just going to go over just so that we can get into what we have for today. We talked about number 1, awareness, the fact that the soul knows that it exists and it knows that it knows. That's awareness, consciousness. And the second thing, we spoke about continuity of identity. That means that across your lifetime, you will carry the same identity. You will know yourself as a certain thing. Let me use that word, as a certain thing. You will know yourself as that throughout your lifetime. As your body changes, the cells in your body's turnover and things like that, you still remain the same person. The soul carries continuity. It has continuity of identity. And also, I said that the soul has agency. That means that the soul can decide. It can initiate action. That's a better way to say it. That's another property of the soul. I also said that the soul has the capacity for relationality. It seeks to be known, not just to be near somebody, not just proximity. It also seeks relationality. It seeks to be known. And also, I said that the soul is a narrative machine. That means it builds meaning from every event. That means that when an event happens, the soul is not just recording the facts, the soul is building meaning out of those events. And I gave a couple of examples in the previous teaching. You can look at the previous teaching. And I said that the way your soul heals, your soul has non-linear sensitivity. That means that the pain the soul feels is not necessarily proportional to the cause of the pain, right? So you might say something to someone and it causes them pain much more than the other person. It's because of the non-linear sensitivity of the soul. Small things can wound the soul, or small things can heal the soul. That's the way the soul behaves. You cannot map the impact to the effect when it comes to the soul. For example, there's a way somebody will hit you. The kind of force they apply will decide the kind of pain you will feel. It's not the same with the soul. A little thing can have a multi-dimensional effect or multi-directional effect on the soul. And finally, I said that the soul seeks alignment. That means that anytime the soul is out of alignment, or whenever it perceives that it is out of alignment, it suffers. For example, if you have an expectation of yourself, or if you have a picture of a version of yourself and your reality does not match up with that, your soul suffers. And these properties of the soul now affect the way the soul behaves. And I talked about the behavior of the soul in the previous teaching. So just go into the teaching and it will be able to help you so that you can understand this conversation. What I wanted to focus on this conversation is the or how you can begin to transform your soul. But before that, let me just define the soul based on all the conversations we've had before now. The conversation that we've had before now, I spoke about the soul as a story building entity. That means that your soul is a narrative constructing machine. It is self-aware, it has agency, and it is oriented towards meaning. That means that the soul weighs things not according to its physical weight, but according to its significance to the soul. And I gave an example of how that you might go to a burial, for example, you see somebody mourning their parents and it triggers a pain in your heart because that particular event reminds you or paints a picture of a possible loss of your own loved one. Or maybe reminds you of how you've lost a relationship or lost someone. The soul does that, it builds meaning out of events. And that is why your memory it's not about recording facts, it's about building narratives that optimizes the soul's survival. Let me leave it there. You can go back to the previous teaching and catch up with all that. And so today we're going to be looking at 5 things you can do to start transforming your soul. And let me say here, the transformation of the soul is one of the hardest things to do. That means that you might you might alter your body, your physical appearance, you can change the dresses you wear, things like that, but the transformation of the soul is a major work, and it's not as easy as it sounds, or is easier said than done. However, when you know the things you ought to know about the transformation of the soul, then you can begin your journey in the transformation of the soul. And why is this important? And I must say, this is one of the things that is important to me as a person, because at a very young age, I realized, I don't know how I came about that realization, but I realized that we generally, as human beings, we put a lot of effort into how we look in terms of our body, our appearance. We go to shop, we go for shopping, we buy clothes, we buy perfumes, we buy shoes, we buy all manner of accessories just so that we can look good in the physical, which is beautiful, which is okay. But I came to a certain level of awareness and I asked myself, why do we not apply the same level of intentionality when it comes to matters of the soul, matters of the mind? And then I made the decision and I said, I'm going to treat my soul with even greater intentionality than the way I treat my physical body. If I'm going to spend I made a decision. If I'm going to spend, let's say, 10,000, for example, buying clothes, I must spend at least minimum 10,000 buying books or more buying books, or involving in activities that will facilitate the transformation of my soul. That was a decision I made very early. And I want to invite you to make that same decision. See your soul as a body that needs to be taken care of. And the same way, for example, your body can fall sick or experience many things is the same way that your soul can experience certain things. And just the same way, for example, you get into a certain lifestyle just so that maybe you don't become fat or sick. In the same way, there is a certain lifestyle you need to align with so that you prevent the sickness of the soul. In fact, if I have the time, I may have a conversation about what I call a diabetic soul and the symptoms of a diabetic soul. The same way you can have diabetes in your physical body, your soul can be diabetic. And I'll have that conversation with you one of these days. But essentially, what I'm saying is you need to give the same focus to your soul, the same focus to your mind, the same way you focus on your body and on your appearance, right? So transformation of the soul is very important. This is the way the Bible says it. I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prosper. The prosperity of your soul The functionality of your soul, the health of your soul is of paramount importance. Your soul is very important. For Jesus said it this way: what will it profit a man to gain the whole world, all this physicality, all this materiality, and lose your own soul? That means that your soul is very important, and we should treat our soul with the same seriousness as we treat our physical bodies, our career, our finances, our families, our relationship. We should treat our soul with much more seriousness, because you see all these things I just listed: your career, your relationship, your finances. You do all that with your soul. I will leave that there because I want to keep this to a few minutes in this conversation, maybe 30 to 45 minutes. Let's get into these things. Today, I will talk about how you can begin to transform your soul. It's not exhaustive. And in the next session, I'll talk about how language transforms the soul. It will be an in depth conversation. All right. Remember that I said that the soul is a story builder that uses story building as its methodology. That means that your soul is currently authoring your reality or your experiences of reality. Your soul is right now authoring the story of your life. That means that everything that has happened to you up until date is a story that your soul is writing. For example, your soul might just be in chapter 10 of your story, and maybe you are 30 something, but your soul is still in chapter 10. Your soul is writing a story, and it's a unified story. I don't want to get into the spiritual angle to this, but let's keep it at that so that we can keep the conversation very light. Your soul is writing a story. Your soul, as you experience life, as you experience people, as you experience failures, wins, betrayals, love, and all those things, as you go through those experiences, your soul is writing a particular story. And your soul does not transform the way you have a physical wound, and the doctor might say, take these drugs and rest, or just rest, give it time, and you would get healed. The soul doesn't function like that. If there is a wound in the soul, if there is a problem in the soul, the problem is not solved with the passage of time and maybe physical rest. No, there is a way the soul heals its wounds, or there is a way the soul gets into transformation. And the number one is this. I want to say it in such a way that is very simple to understand. Let's say something happens to you. Now, there are facts of that occurrence. There are the cold, hard facts. Let's say you entered a relationship, for example, and the person broke up with you, for example. I don't want to get into some details. The fact is that the person has broken up with you. Maybe the breakup was as a result of a certain betrayal of a certain kind. Those are the facts. You cannot change those facts. There is nothing you do on this earth that would transmute or change those facts. The facts are the facts, and those events might have inflicted a wound on your soul and causes your soul to go a particular direction or feel a certain way or get into a particular disposition. The way the soul heals or transforms from that situation is not by the cold, hard facts. No. The way the soul begins to transform is by reinterpreting the story. I'm going to stay here a little bit so that I can explain it in such a way that will not be misunderstood. One of the ways your soul begins to transform itself is by reinterpreting its past. And how does it reinterpret the past? By re-editing the stories, the narratives. I'll give you an example. And I want to be very careful here so that it doesn't sound like what I'm saying is you have to now tell a lie about the fact in order to transform your soul. That is not what I'm trying to say. This is what I'm trying to say. When something happens to you, for example, and I'm going to use relationships because this is something that is more relatable. Let's say, for example, you entered into a relationship and you spent 5 years of your life in that particular relationship. And in that relationship, there was a lot of hurt, there was a lot of betrayal. and this was somebody who you wanted to get married to, but the way they had conducted themselves in the course of that relationship left you broken. And then you come out of that relationship, and then you are stuck in a point where you can't find yourself getting into another relationship because you are still dealing with the pain of what happened in the previous relationship. I remember what I said in the last teaching, that at every given point you are the continuous compounded form of all of your experiences. And so you come to a point where you really need to move past this. It's evident that this particular situation has wounded you deeply and it is stalling your movement, maybe not necessarily in your career or in any other area of your life, but maybe in your relationship life. And so you decide to visit a therapist or speak to a coach or speak to a friend or somebody who is more knowledgeable or more grounded, and you want to deal with that particular situation. The way the soul can begin to heal from that particular incident and begin to transform itself is by reinterpreting the event that happened, not by denying the facts. In fact, one of the ways to heal your soul is to be honest about the fact. These are the things that happen, but this is how you need to reinterpret that story to facilitate or to trigger transformation in your soul. First of all, you are honest about the facts. Now, depending on the situation, and that's why I don't want to get into certain examples, because I know that people have different nuanced experiences. But I want to try and tie it to a more general principle, just so that everybody can apply it to their own relationship. But there are certain relationships where there are certain situations where the pain you feel in your soul is as a result of somebody you can still talk to, or somebody you can still see, or somebody you are still in contact with. There are some situations where you are no longer in contact with that person, you can't see the person. How do you move past that if it requires a conversation with that person? I'm going to try and make it as general as possible. In that situation, let's assume that you are the only one who needs to heal from this without maybe apologies from the person or closure from the person. What do you need to do to move past this particular thing or begin to transform the pain in your soul so that you can move forward from this situation? The first thing is that you, of course, an accountability structure will be good, an accountability partner, somebody you can speak to. The reason is because the way the soul feels and experience is not the same way the soul feels and experience when that experience is verbalized or spoken aloud. And that is why in some religions you have things like confession, you have things like, for in therapy, you have things like, you speak about the situation. There is a principle behind speaking the situation, because when you speak it aloud, it feels different from when you're just feeling it in your mind. And that's why speaking it to a third party. Because if that story survives speaking, then there can be transformation that can happen from that particular event. Let's say you have an accountability structure, somebody can talk to a coach or a mentor or a therapist, and then you begin to relay or replay the fact of that particular relationship. What you need to do in that situation is lay the facts on the table. And when I say the facts, what you did, what the person did, and what the outcome was. What we do most times, and that's why a lot of people stay in that victim position and they never transform, is because we focus on all the things that the other person has done to us and not what we also did to contribute to that particular situation. And I know some people will say, no, but I didn't contribute anything to that situation. In fact, sometimes your silence or your complacence, for example, is a contribution to the event. Let's say it was your silence or your continued tolerance in a certain direction that led to that particular action. It is part of your contribution. Right? You need to lay down the cold hard facts. This is what I did, this is what the person did, and this was the outcome of the situation. When you lay down the facts on the table, what you now need to do is to begin to ask yourself, what lessons can I learn from this particular situation? Let's say you were betrayed by somebody betrayed you, and maybe they lived a double life and you found out after many years, and then you have to deal with this particular situation. Now, it's difficult to deal with. It's not as easy as I'm saying it. The emotions, processing the emotion is another conversation. There's another conversation for how to process emotions of betrayal and things like that. But just to keep it flat and simple, you now need to begin to ask yourself, What lessons can I learn from this? It's difficult to do that exercise, and that's why you need to do it with somebody that can keep you accountable or can regulate the conversation. Because if you are to do it yourself, you will always side yourself. You will always be biased in your conclusions. What lessons can I learn from this? And then when you list all the lessons you can learn from this, now what happens is that in a way you are reinterpreting that past, because while that thing was a situation that betrayed you, but the lessons that you've learned and who that has made you now, and the lessons you're going to take from it to the next relationship, becomes a reinterpretation of that past. In a way, at a certain stage in your healing, you can look back and be grateful for that particular event. Not it was terrible. Yes, it was terrible. We agree it was terrible. But in a certain sense, you might be grateful for that particular event because while you were in that particular situation, you didn't realize how undiscerning you were. But that betrayal opened your eyes and made you realize that, you know what, for you to function properly in relationships, you must have discernment. And so, one of the lessons I learned from this particular situation is that all these things happened to me because I was undiscerning. And so, when you now reinterpret, so the way you can now reinterpret that is maybe I had to go through this so that I could learn discernment. Maybe there was an opportunity for me to be discerning. Maybe there were signs and I was ignoring it. Maybe as a result of my ignorance or my pride, I was feeling like, oh, I got this all covered and this thing happened to me. But you know what? Maybe I needed to go through this at this stage of my life so that I can be more discerning. Because there might be another relationship that is coming in the future that will require my absolute 100% discernment. By reinterpreting your past that way, you take back the power of authoring your own experiences. Because when you approach a particular story from the standpoint of a victim, you will never take back the power of rewriting your own story. One of the levers of transformation of the soul is reinterpreting your past by taking back the power of transformation by not being a victim. Reinterpret the past in such a way that keeps you accountable for your own actions in that past. Like it or not, in every outcome, there are contributions from the parties involved. You may not be able to be responsible for the other person's action, but at least be responsible for your own action. And once you do that, you will give your soul the power to begin to trigger its own healing. And especially that reinterpretation needs to be spoken aloud. You must have that conversation. If you refuse to have that conversation with somebody else, which I would recommend you should, at least have that conversation with yourself, but verbalize it. Begin to ask yourself, what happened in this relationship? I know I'm the one that was hurt, but are there things that I did in this relationship to enable that treatment I received? Ask yourself that question not from a victim perspective. And once you can do that, you can begin to trigger the transformation of your soul. What will happen to your soul is you will now realize that actually I have power to decide how I interpret events, and I have power to decide what my story will be going forward. Number one, reinterpret the past, and that is one way to trigger transformation of the soul. Now, the second part is, remember, I talked about the properties of the soul, and the properties of the soul also flows into this particular conversation. I said that one of the properties of the soul is agency. Simple terms, you can initiate action. Now, I want to differentiate that from reacting. Reaction is not initiation, it is just reaction. You didn't choose, as it were, that action, especially when it's reflex. When you are in a reactive mode, what you are simply telling your soul is that you do not have power to make decisions. What you are telling your soul simply is that other people have the power to decide what I do in every situation. If you're a reactive person, if you're a defensive person, you don't have any power. You don't have any power over your own soul, because everything that everybody does elicits a reaction from you. You are living a reactionary life. Everything is a reaction. Somebody says something, you react. There is no agency. And the moment you do that, you are telling the soul that it's sick. You are not exercising the property of the soul that keeps it healthy, which is agency. How can you now begin to transform your soul or trigger the transformation of your soul? Begin to exercise agency in little acts. When you start doing that, your soul will start healing internally. It's not something that you can explain scientifically, but once you start doing those, exercising those agency in small acts, then your soul will begin to heal. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by agency in small acts. Let's say, for example, you've never been the kind of person who, in any conflict situation, you apologize first, even if the person was wrong. When we talk about apologizing first or just initiating reconciliation, it's not just about the person or the person's ego or working against your own ego and pride. No, it's about the soul. Because if in your own experience, every time there has been an apology, it was as a result of the other person's apology. Let's say a person comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm sorry for this," and you not say, "Me too, I'm sorry." That is also a reactionary apology. You didn't initiate that apology. Your soul is weakened by that reactionary life. How can you begin to transform your soul? Exercise agency in small acts. Be the one to apologize first. It's not about the person. Don't care about the person's pride. Once you begin to do that, you will notice that your soul begins to come alive because your soul is now telling you, yes, this is how I want to behave. This is how I this is my property. This is how I behave. It's just like putting fish in water. The genius comes alive. When you start to exercise agency in small acts, your soul begins to come alive. One of the things you need to start doing is begin to exercise agency in small acts. So initiate an apology. Don't wait for somebody to apologize first. Apologize to the person and initiate that conversation. Another thing is, as a way to exercise agency in small acts, the soul prefers when the idea comes from you. And so let's say there's an area of your life where you're struggling with discipline. And the only time you stay disciplined is when somebody is observing you. As you do those things, you are weakening your soul because you're simply telling your soul, I cannot do anything by myself. I need somebody to push me, or I need to react to somebody else's action in order to do something. If you're the type that you only stay disciplined when somebody is monitoring you, you are simply telling your soul that you are reacting to somebody else's presence or somebody else's oversight. One of the ways to begin to trigger the transformation of the soul is to exercise, decide something you are going to be disciplined in without anybody observing. Nobody's observing you. That discipline is yours. For example, you say, I don't read. I want to start reading. I know it's easy to get somebody to keep you accountable. That's good. It helps you. But you are taking away the power of the soul because of the property of agency of the soul. You are not letting the soul exercise that agency. Decide, I'm going to be disciplined in this thing and I'm going to do it without observing eyes. If you can successfully do that for a protracted period of time, you begin to notice that your soul feels more powerful. You cannot appreciate the things I'm telling you except you practice them. It's as simple as that. Initiate apology first. Observe disciplines without anybody keeping you accountable. And another thing is, because the soul exercises agency, and I just remember the teaching I did about the structure of the soul. I'm beginning to think if I need to do a teaching on the structure of the soul. But let me import some of the things I taught from there to explain my next point. One of the structures of the soul is that the soul is structured for mercy. That means that the soul wants to receive mercy and the soul wants to give mercy. When the soul has not experienced mercy, it disintegrates. It begins to disintegrate. It becomes sick. When the soul does not show mercy, the soul also becomes sick. And that is why you notice that people who are really unmerciful, there's a lot of viciousness around their life. They are very vicious people. And viciousness is a sign of sickness in the soul, that your soul is not feeling whole. Right? Because of the structure of the soul, the structure of mercy, the soul wants to show mercy and the soul wants to receive mercy. How can you apply it to exercising small agency in small acts? Decide to show somebody kindness that won't pay you back. The soul can differentiate between a transaction and sacrifice. The soul can distinguish it. right? When you give somebody something, expecting something in return, it doesn't empower your soul in terms of transformation. It doesn't. Yes, it can favor you, it can favor your life materially, but it doesn't really empower the soul. One of the things that empowers the soul or makes the soul feel alive or triggers transformation in the soul is showing kindness that won't be returned to you. Think about it as this: when you take drugs, for example, it triggers some chemical reaction that releases healing into your body. In the same way, when you show kindness without expecting anything in return, it triggers healing in your soul. There's a chemical reaction. It's not chemical, but there's a reaction in your soul that triggers uh, the healing wave in your soul, and it begins to heal. So when you show, one of the ways to begin to heal the soul is to begin to now show kindness. If you want to, if you want to hack the soul, if you really want to hack the soul, and it's not even because this is a teaching of some religious school of thoughts. Show kindness to the person who has been unkind to you. Repay evil with good. It's not a religious talk, it's life. It's because of the way the soul is structured. If you can show kindness, especially to that person who has been unkind to you, you will heal your soul in ways that all the therapy cannot help you, right? Kindness with no possible return is one of the ways to begin to transform your soul under the exercise agency in small acts. As you do these things, what happens is that your soul begins to rewrite the story and begins to tell itself, I'm not a victim of my circumstances. I actually create my own circumstances. I'm not a victim of what happened to me. I can actually decide my own experiences. Right? When you begin to do that, you begin to reauthor the soul. Remember, you do not heal wounds. The soul's wounds does not heal by time and rest. It heals by reauthoring the story, by taking responsibility for your actions, right? As you do these things, your soul begins to rewrite its story and you begin to regain your power. The number three lever for transformation of the soul, practical things I'm showing you, is repair relationships. The necessary ones, repair relationship, repair old relationships. Not every relationships require repairing. That means it's not every relationship you're supposed to repair. Some are supposed to just stay the way they are. But there are certain relationships in your life that this relationship is beneficial to my soul. And maybe I spoil that relationship because of my pride or my ignorance or my attitude. Begin to repair those relationships. Especially because your soul knows that it needs relationality. Remember, relationality is one of the properties of the soul. The soul must relate with people of like kind, especially, right? When you begin to repair old relationships, it begins to reauthor those stories, the narrative of your soul, or the story that your soul has been writing about you. Let's say you spoil a relationship that was good to you. What you've done is that you've told your soul, you've given your soul a story to add to the story it's writing, and somewhere in that story, you would be a villain in your own story. Maybe because you spoiled a relationship that was good for your soul, right? Attempt to repair relationships that was good for your soul. You see, because when you begin to repair those relationships, then you can begin to reauthor the story. Let's say if you had someone in your life who was a really good friend and you lost touch with them as a result of something that happened, and you didn't even have time to go back into that situation. What really happened? What made us go apart? And then navigate that. If you don't do that, your soul will always know that there's a part of your story that is not complete. And as a result of that, that side of that story will begin to rot and it will begin to make your soul feel sick, even if you do not immediately identify that that is the source of that feeling in your soul. Sometimes there are things that happen to us that we don't know the source of. Right? Sometimes it could be a relationship you've not repaired that you are supposed to have repaired. Right? Begin to make efforts to repair relationship, and this time around, initiate that repair. Seek the reconciliation yourself. And by doing that, you are activating two of those levers, which is exercising agency. in small acts and also repairing relationships. You begin to trigger healing in your soul, right? And especially if that particular relationship involves hashing out something that was not resolved. In dealing with that thing, you need to put defensiveness aside and let the person speak their part and you speak your part, and then you guys can find compromises and concessions. But repair relationships that are good for your soul. That will begin to transform your soul. Why? Because the soul has the property of relationality. The soul must relate with other people. Right? And the number four one, I want to see if we can finish by 45 minutes. The number four is, remember I said that the soul suffers when there is a disalignment, when the picture you have of yourself and your reality does not line up. The soul suffers, and that's what we call unhappiness. Begin to close that alignment gap. How do you do it? Take small steps towards the ideal version of yourself. Let's say, for example, there is this ideal job you want or this ideal salary you want, but you're not there yet. Instead of hoping that something will just come and transform it, no, your soul appreciates movement more than destination. Your soul is in the state of perpetual healing or health when it recognizes movement. The soul appreciates motion. And that is why we like to move. We don't like to be stuck in a place. We like to move. It's even associated with the body. If you sit too long, it's not good for your health. In the same way, your soul does not like to stay stagnant. It likes to move towards something. The soul appreciates motion. How you can begin to close that alignment gap so that the suffering reduces is, let's say there's a particular ideal job you want and you are here, for example. What can you do to begin to move towards a particular goal? Maybe you can take a course or even apply for that job, right? Speak to somebody who's experienced in that field and let them evaluate where you are and things like that so that they can show you your blind spot and things you need to improve. Just by doing those little adjustments, your soul begins to heal, your soul begins to transform because you are now taking responsibility of your own life and you're not waiting for something to just land from heaven for you. Begin to close the alignment gap by simple, small acts that can move you towards that destination. Even if at the end of the day you don't reach that destination, but your soul recognizes that there is motion happening. That's the number four. And then the number five one, which is not the final one. The final one is a whole session. For the next session is use time to retell your story. What do I mean? Let the passage of time be a tool for you, right, to retell the story of your life. And remember, I said last week, I ended by saying that one of the ways you can begin to heal your soul or transform your soul, or even find out what the places where you're stuck is to begin to now retell your story, because your soul is a story building machine that uses storytelling as its method. Begin to retell the story of your life. Use the passage of time to retell your story. Why? Because the soul requires repetition for certain things to land in it. That means that you must be consistent in the story you tell yourself about yourself, in the story you tell others about yourself. And that is why you must never say anything negative about yourself to other people or to yourself. Your soul respects your voice more than the voice of other people. I know there is a certain sense in which the soul respects the voices of those who are in authority over you, especially if you acknowledge their authority, right? However, your soul recognizes your voice as its own authority. But there is a way you will begin to speak and your soul will dethrone you as authority. That means that your soul will no longer value your voice as its own authority. And that is why next week, I will speak to you about how to use words or language to transform the soul, because there is a way you would speak. There is a manner of speech you will engage in, and your soul will begin to tell itself, this person doesn't have authority. Because the soul can perceive the signature of authority in somebody's voice. It can perceive authority in the environment. And so if you're not careful with the way you use your words, your soul will begin to discount the value and the weight of your words. If you don't use language right, your soul will begin to discount the value and the weight of your words. I'll say that again. If you don't use words and language rightly, Your soul would continuously discount the weight of your own words. And the soul recognizes weight, the soul recognizes authority. Use time to re-author your story by retelling the story of your life. And so next week, I will go into details. I think it will be a longer conversation. We'll go into details talking about how to use language to transform your soul. I hope this has helped you. And like I said, this will be of no use to you if you do not start to practice these things, right? I'm looking forward to feedback from you. Let me know if this was helpful, if this helped you in some way. Comment, subscribe, share with somebody that needs this. And also, when you subscribe, turn on the notifications so that whenever we have clarity sessions, you'll be informed. And remember, I always say that clarity precedes movement. I will see you in the next session.